I found out I didn't legally exist on a Tuesday morning. Not metaphorically. Not emotionally. On paper. The woman behind the government desk looked at me like I was a glitch in the system. My social security number belonged to a little boy who died in 1990. The name I had carried for 32 years belonged to a child who was buried before I even learned how to read. And the worst part? I remember being 6 years old when my father died. But according to every official record, I died at 3. That was the day I realized something terrifying. I wasn't unwanted. I was stolen. Before I tell you what my stepfather knew, before I tell you what the FBI said when they told me to stay exactly where I was, I need you to do something. If you've ever felt like you didn't belong, like you were fighting to prove you deserve to exist, like someone erased your voice or your worth, hit like on this video. And in the comments, tell me one word that describes how you would feel if you discovered your entire identity was a lie. Just one word. I read every single one. And if you believe truth always finds its way back home, subscribe. Because what happened next didn't just change my life. It exposed a 32-year lie, and the woman who thought she would never be caught. My name was Jordan Blake. At least, that's what I had written on every job application since I was 18. It was printed on my high school diploma, stitched onto the uniform of the warehouse where I worked double shifts, and engraved on the cheap metal tag I wore after the accident that crushed my wrist under a conveyor belt. I grew up believing two things about myself: that I had to earn my place in every room, and that love was conditional. I started working the week I turned 18. Not because I wanted independence, but because I was told I had no safety net. My stepfather, Daniel Hayes, made that very clear. "You're not my blood," he'd say whenever I asked for anything beyond the basics. Food. A roof. Silence. Still, I built something. Slowly. Paycheck by paycheck. I rented a tiny apartment with peeling paint and a window that wouldn't fully close. I kept exactly $52 folded in my wallet for emergencies. That money meant control. Survival. After the accident, when the doctor said I couldn't lift more than 10 pounds for months, I lost my job within a week. No savings. No insurance. No family to call. So I walked into a government office to ask for medical assistance. I thought that day was about swallowing my pride. I had no idea it was about discovering I had been living under a dead child's name. And when the clerk looked at me and said, "Ma'am, this number belongs to someone who died," something inside me shifted. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just unwanted. I was impossible. And if I didn't exist, then who, exactly, had I been living as for 32 years? Daniel Hayes never raised his voice. That was the unsettling part. He didn't scream. He didn't hit. He didn't rage. He just withheld affection, approval, acknowledgement. He had this quiet way of looking at me like I was a guest who had overstayed her welcome. "You're not my blood, Jordan," he would say whenever I challenged him. Calm. Controlled. Final. My mother, the woman I believed was my biological mother, Carol, would always deflect. "He doesn't mean it like that." But she never corrected him. Never defended me. She just tightened her jaw and changed the subject. When I turned 18, my bags were already packed by the door when I came home from school. No discussion. No fight. Daniel stood in the hallway with his arms crossed. "You're an adult now. Time to stand on your own." Carol cried quietly in the kitchen, but she didn't stop him. I remember holding my suitcase, waiting for someone to say it was a test. Waiting for someone to say I mattered. No one did. I told myself it made me stronger. That independence was power. But standing on that porch, with nowhere to go and no explanation why I had always felt like an outsider in my own home, a question took root. Why did he say I wasn't his blood like it was a secret he couldn't quite keep? At the government office, the clerk's fingers froze above the keyboard. She looked at the screen. then at me, then back at the screen. Ma'am, this social security number was flagged years ago. Flagged. That word didn't belong in my life. I paid taxes. I worked. I existed in every ordinary way. She turned the monitor slightly away from me, the way people do when they're about to say something that changes everything. This number belongs to a male child. Deceased. 1990. Male. Deceased. My pulse slowed instead of racing. Shock doesn't always scream. Sometimes it goes quiet. Clinical. That's impossible, I said evenly. I was 6 when my dad died. She frowned. According to this, the child died at 3. Car accident. With his father. I felt something split inside my memory. I could see flashes, a hospital hallway, a funeral, hands gripping mine. But were those memories, or stories told so often they became mine? A supervisor was called. Papers were printed. Whispers started behind the desk. I sat perfectly still. Because if the boy tied to my identity died at 3, then who was I at 6? And why did I remember a father who, on paper, had already been buried? The supervisor didn't treat me like a criminal. He treated me like evidence. He asked me to sit in a private office. Closed the door. His voice lowered. This case was flagged by Interpol years ago. Interpol. That word doesn't enter normal lives. My hands rested calmly in my lap, but inside, every memory I had was being audited. He asked for my birth certificate. I didn't have the original. It was lost in a move, I said automatically, the same answer my mother had given me my whole life. Moves. There had been many. Different cities. Different schools. Always sudden. Always of better opportunities. He stepped outside to make a call. Through the thin wall, I heard fragments. Possible match, age aligns, she doesn't know. When he came back, his expression had changed. Not suspicion. Not accusation. Recognition. Jordan, he said carefully, I need you to stay in this building. Why? He hesitated. Because someone has been looking for you for 32 years. The floor didn't fall out from under me. It tilted. If someone had been searching for me that long, then the woman who raised me hadn't just lied. She had taken something that never belonged to her. And suddenly Daniel's voice echoed in my head. You're not my blood. How long had he known? 2 agents walked in an hour later. One introduced himself as Agent Marcus Reed from the FBI. The other didn't speak much. They didn't cuff me. They didn't accuse me. They sat across from me like people about to hand over something fragile. Jordan, Marcus said gently, the woman who raised you, lost a son in 1990. My throat tightened, but I said nothing. He died in a car accident at 3 years old. Witness reports confirmed it. Death certificate. Burial. Everything. My chest felt hollow. 6 months after his death, he continued, a baby girl was abducted from a supermarket parking lot in Ohio. A baby girl. My pulse began to drum in my ears. The mother turned around for less than a minute. The stroller was gone. I stopped breathing. We believe Carol Blake took that child. She moved states repeatedly. Changed jobs often. Used her deceased son's identity to register you. She told the story so many times, even you built memories around it. Built memories. My father's funeral at 6. The hospital smell. The grief. Fabricated scaffolding. You weren't born Jordan Blake, Marcus said quietly. That name belongs to her son. I stared at my reflection in the dark computer screen. If I wasn't Jordan, then who had been abandoned at 18? And why had Daniel waited until I was almost grown before pushing me out the door? I didn't cry in that office. I asked for water. I adjusted my posture. I listened. Inside, though, something tectonic was shifting. 32 years of identity collapsing without a sound. Agent Reed told me my biological parents had never stopped searching. That the mother had started a foundation for missing children. That my case had been one of the longest open files connected to that region. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt betrayal layered over betrayal. Carol hadn't just lied. She had rehearsed my entire childhood. Every birthday. Every story about my father. Every move to a new city when questions got too close. And Daniel. Daniel had known. Agent Reed told me they had evidence that my stepfather discovered the truth when I was 17. Carol confessed during an argument. He didn't report her. He waited. He waited until I turned 18. He told investigators he didn't want to destroy your life as a minor, Marcus said carefully. Destroy my life. So instead, he let me live it as a ghost. I felt the anger rise like heat, but I forced it down. Anger is loud. Strategy is quiet. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. They thought they had controlled my story for 32 years. But now I knew the truth. And truth, handled correctly, is power. The question was, how was I going to use it? That night, I didn't call Carol. I didn't confront Daniel. I didn't run. I asked Agent Reed for copies. Documents. Dates. Statements. Timelines. I wanted everything in writing. If my life had been a fabrication, I was going to study it like a case file. Pain makes people reckless. I couldn't afford that. Instead, I went home to my tiny apartment and laid the papers across my kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle. The abduction report. The date. The city. The witness sketch. 6 months old. Brown eyes. Small birthmark near the left shoulder blade. My hand moved slowly to my shoulder. The mark was there. I stared at the wall for a long time after that. Carol hadn't chosen me because she loved me. She had chosen me because I was small enough to replace what she lost. And Daniel, he hadn't thrown me out because I was difficult. He had thrown me out because I was evidence. I could expose them now. Immediately. Publicly. Emotionally. But that would give them time to prepare defenses. To manipulate. To twist. No. If they had built a lie carefully over decades, then I would dismantle it carefully. Silently. The next morning, I requested a voluntary DNA test. I wanted confirmation before confrontation. Because once I stepped forward, there would be no going back to being Jordan Blake. And I wasn't sure yet who I was becoming. The DNA results would take days. Days where Carol thought I was still just her quiet, distant daughter. Days where Daniel probably believed the past was buried deep enough to stay that way. I didn't call them. I showed up. Sunday dinner. Like always. Carol smiled too brightly when she opened the door. Jordan, you look pale. Are you eating enough? Same script. Same concerned tone. Same performance. Daniel barely looked at me. Still out of work? I nodded calmly. I even apologized for not visiting more. They relaxed. That's the thing about people who live inside a lie, they monitor for explosions. Tears. Accusations. Drama. I gave them none. Instead, I observed. Carol flinched when I casually mentioned going to a government office for medical help. Just a flicker in her eyes. Daniel's jaw tightened when I said they were verifying some documents. So he knew the risk. He watched me the rest of dinner like someone waiting for a bomb that never went off. I left early, hugged Carol, thanked Daniel for everything. And as I drove away, I realized something unsettling. They were afraid. Not of the law. Of exposure. of losing control of the narrative they had rehearsed for decades. Good. Let them sleep peacefully for a few more nights. Because while they believed I was still in the dark, I was mapping every crack in their story. And the DNA results were coming. The only question was, what would happen when science confirmed what my instincts already knew? For days, I didn't call. I didn't confront. I didn't slip. I watched Carol and Daniel through subtle interactions, phone calls I overheard, mentions of old documents left lying around, their routines that betrayed anxiety. Carol had begun leaving receipts in odd places, as if reminding herself of what she'd done. Daniel spoke less, lingered longer over trivial tasks, like the dishwasher or the mail. Their careful control was cracking under the weight of secrets they thought were buried. I documented everything mentally, patterns, reactions, inconsistencies. Every lie has a rhythm, and I was learning theirs. Every dinner, every casual question, every sideways glance became data. I kept my face neutral, my tone measured, my movements predictable. Strategy doesn't shout. Strategy waits. It calculates. It memorizes the points where the story will break under pressure. And while they were busy pretending normalcy, I began to feel a strange satisfaction, quiet, almost imperceptible. I wasn't angry anymore. I was precise. Because the truth wasn't just coming. It was being assembled, piece by piece, in the silence where they least expected it. And soon, every lie they built would crumble under its own weight. The question was, when the first piece fell, would they notice, or would they still believe they were untouchable? I didn't wait for permission. I created opportunity. The next morning, I requested a file from the center Carol had founded years ago, a routine check on missing children protocols. My name wasn't on anything official yet, but I had leverage, the paperwork, the subtle knowledge, the ability to ask questions no one would question. I combed through every report, every handwritten note, every scanned photo. Names, dates, even the font of the official stamps, they all whispered secrets. I compared the details to what I remembered from my childhood. By mid-afternoon, I had constructed a timeline only I could see. Every move Carol had made to cover her tracks. Every lie rehearsed so meticulously. Every story repeated so often that she believed it herself. Then I sent a simple email to Agent Reed, I have a map. Ready to proceed when you are. No dramatic words. No accusation. Just quiet control. Carol and Daniel didn't know I had started aligning evidence that would expose decades of deception. They thought I was lost. Angry. Confused. But I was neither. I was waiting. And when the time came, I would move again, not out of emotion, but out of precision. The question lingering in the air, how long could a lie survive when the person it belonged to became its most meticulous observer? 2 weeks in, and the first complication appeared. An unexpected call from a distant relative of Carol's, someone I hadn't known existed, asked why I was digging into old files. The voice was polite, but the undertone was a warning, stop, or risk consequences I couldn't yet see. My hands tightened around the phone. For a moment, the years of control, strategy, patience, it all felt fragile. One wrong move, and Carol could bury evidence, rewrite stories, and I'd be the one exposed as the interloper. But then I realized something crucial. Fear was predictable. Threats were predictable. Reactions could be anticipated. I paused. Breathed. Smiled, quietly, to myself. I drafted a reply that said nothing yet implied everything. I'm only trying to understand my own history. I hope you understand why this matters to me. No panic. No confession. No impulsive action. Just a seed of doubt planted in someone else's mind. Carol was rattled now, even without knowing why. And Daniel. Daniel's careful calm had begun to fray. The lie was still alive, but only barely. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the tension coil around me like a spring. Patience had brought me this far. But now I knew, one misstep could ruin everything. The question loomed, silent and sharp. Could I maintain control when the first threat came knocking at my door? By the third week, I understood the cost. To continue, I had to sacrifice comfort, certainty, and the illusion of normalcy I still clung to. I stopped calling friends. I stopped answering casual messages. I barely ate, slept in fragments, and spent hours poring over records, notes, and timelines. Every scrap of data became a weapon. Every memory I thought was mine now served strategy. I let go of anger toward Carol, not because I forgave her, but because anger is loud and betrays planning. I let go of resentment toward Daniel, not because he deserved it, but because resentment is noise. Instead, I held only observation, calculation, and patience. 3 months of quiet surveillance, subtle probing, and mental mapping had led me to one undeniable truth: exposure would cost me personally. Relationships, time, even fragments of my remaining peace. But without it, I would remain trapped in someone else's story forever. I stared at my reflection in the mirror that night. The same brown eyes. The same birthmark near my left shoulder blade. But the person looking back wasn't a victim. She was a strategist. And she was ready to set the trap. The question whispered through the quiet of my apartment: could they withstand the inevitable collapse when I finally chose to strike? I knew the moment had arrived. DNA confirmation was in my hands. Every test, every result, every match proved it. I wasn't Jordan Blake. I was Emma Lawson, a girl stolen at 6 months old. My real parents were alive, searching, hoping. The child Carol had lost, the one she buried in lies, had been replaced by me, unknowingly rehearsing a life that wasn't mine. I contacted Agent Reed. We planned a meeting under the pretense of an interview about the Missing Children Center. Carol thought she was speaking to me in routine oversight. She smiled, repeated rehearsed stories, shared records she believed were untraceable. I listened. I watched. I recorded. Every lie she told, every omission, every flinch became evidence. Daniel hovered silently in the background, thinking his restraint would protect him. It didn't. His complicity, his years of passive silence, was part of the trap. When I finally revealed my identity in the federal building, it wasn't a scream. It wasn't an accusation. It was calm, deliberate. I'm not Jordan Blake. I'm Emma Lawson. And your story ends today. Carol froze. Daniel's jaw dropped. The question that echoed in their eyes, too late to answer, was the same one I had asked myself all those years. Who really controls the story? This time, it was me. The courtroom felt unreal. Carol sat rigid, her hands clutching the edges of the defense table, eyes darting between the judge, the agents, and me. Daniel slouched in the gallery, trying to disappear, though everyone could see the weight of his complicity. When the evidence was laid out, the DNA reports, the abduction timeline, the photos, the recorded admissions, it was undeniable. 32 years of lies unraveled in hours. Carol tried to speak, to explain, to justify. But the words faltered, twisted by guilt and fear. Daniel could only whisper apologies no one believed. I stood silently, my hands folded, watching as the law did what they could not: name every truth, assign responsibility, and dismantle their control. The judge read the sentence: 15 years for Carol. Freedom with conditions for Daniel. No applause. No satisfaction. Just justice, measured and final. Outside the courthouse, my sister of creation approached me cautiously. A hesitant bridge between the past we shared and the truth that divided us. And my grandmother, the woman who loved me regardless of blood, held my hands. "You are still my granddaughter," she whispered. I realized then, identity is not just inherited. It is reclaimed. But the final question remained: could I now build a life from the pieces they had tried to steal? 3 months later, I packed the last box in my tiny apartment, the $52 I had clutched for survival tucked carefully in my wallet. I didn't need them anymore, not for food, not for rent, not for proof of existence. Those dollars had carried me through a life that wasn't mine. Now, they were a symbol of rebirth. I drove to the city where my real parents lived. My mother, tearful but radiant, greeted me with an embrace that had waited 32 years to exist. My father's hands shook as he held mine. My brother, my real brother, smiled at me across the kitchen table, talking to a sister he had believed gone forever. I walked through the doors of the missing children's center my mother had built. Every photograph, every story, every child listed on those walls reminded me of the life I had stolen back from darkness. I didn't just belong, I had purpose. I became the voice I had longed to hear for 32 years. Carol would serve her sentence. Daniel would carry his guilt quietly. I would not be defined by their lies. For the first time, I saw clearly, I wasn't Jordan Blake, a shadow of someone dead. I was Emma Lawson. Not the blood of anyone, but the everything of someone who had been waiting for me all along. And as I held my brother's hand, the world felt simple, terrifying, and perfect all at once. Because some truths, no matter how late, are worth a lifetime of waiting. And some people, finally, come home. If Emma's story left you breathless, hit the like button to show you felt every moment with her. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if you discovered your entire life had been a lie? And subscribe to the channel to follow more stories of hidden truths, courage, and people reclaiming the lives they were meant to live.